Welcome to Gospel Lessons. I'm Kevin Prince. Today we're continuing our series on false traditions, beliefs we often pass down in the church but are not rooted in Scripture or the Gospel. These traditions, while sometimes harmless, can prevent a deeper understanding of doctrine. Today we will be discussing magical objects, such as the Urim and Thummim. Joining me is Bruce Porter, a renowned scholar with degrees in ancient Near Eastern and Middle East studies, specializing in Semitic languages and religious history. Bruce has authored over 16 books and is well known for his research on the Pearl of Great Price. I first met him on a life-changing tour in 2018, which inspired this Gospel Lessons YouTube channel. Now, if you've never traveled with Bruce, I highly recommend it. He frequently speaks and guides on LDS-based cruises with Go and Do Travel. These cruises offer opportunities to connect with like-minded members and learn from speakers like Bruce. I'll be joining the Momentum 2026 cruise with him, and if you're interested, use promo code PRINCE for $100 off. All proceeds from Gospel Lessons, including sponsorships, go to charity. Let's talk about these objects themselves, whether it's the Urim and Thummim, the various seer stones that people talk about. We don't have to get into what was used when. That's not important for this discussion. But some people, you talked about people leaving the church or having struggles with things. Some people just don't like the idea of magical objects being used to do any part of this. And I'm like, when I hear that, I'm like, what, are you part of Christianity? Because magical objects are everywhere throughout Christianity. We're talking, put aside the seer stones and put aside the Urim and Thummim, although the Urim and Thummim is throughout ancient texts, including the Old Testament. But we've got an Ark of the Covenant. We've got a breastplate of judgment. We've got a staff of Aaron's staff. We've got so many quote unquote magical objects. What do you say to people that struggle with the idea of magical artifacts and objects being used in religion?
Well, in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with it. I have a magical object right here. It's almost like a Urim and Thummim. It's called an iPhone, and this has. I mean, if there's anything magical, I could find it easier to believe in a Urim and Thummim than I can what this phone can do. And so it just depends on what you're looking at. And there's nothing wrong with magical objects, because objects come. There's words that are used when it comes to biblical studies. You have a Christophany, which is a vision of Christ. You have a theophany, which is a vision of God, and you have a hierophany, which is a spiritual experience, something that's sacred, a sacred experience. Here, hierophany is considered a sacred experience. So Jacob has a dream. He lays down at night and he pulls up a real soft rock to use as a pillow, and he has a dream, and so he anoints that rock and says, this is where I had a sacred experience, so I'm going to anoint that rock, or set up a rock, or build an altar out of that rock, or whatever. So it becomes almost a magical object. It's not because he used the rock for a pillow that gave him a dream. Maybe he fell down and hit his head on that rock, and who knows. But that rock becomes a magical object. We have different objects that provide sacred experiences for us, and the rod of Aaron, the manna, the Ten Commandments, the tablets, all of these things provided a spiritual experience, a hierophanic experience, and so they become national treasures, so to speak. And so there's nothing wrong with these objects, and even though there was some or appears to be some magic involved in that, there's nothing wrong with that. The Urim and Thummim, is it magic? Or is it the focus that's causing Joseph Smith to see the words? Is it the focus? Is it the revelatory learning and the revelatory ability that's causing him to see these words, or the words that's teaching him how to focus? Is it the seer stone? Is it actually a seer stone? I mean, he found it digging a well. One of them he found digging a well. So is it the seer stone that has the magical properties, or is it Joseph Smith's spiritual ability that is using that seer stone to focus on? So So it's I don't think it's wrong to realize that these things are real, true, and they existed.
I totally agree. And you kind of make a distinction between two types of magical objects as I'm thinking about it. One is there's an object that is special to you and helps you connect to God in some way or to focus in some way, puts you in a state of mind that opens your mind to revelation, to a connection, to an experience that you need. And that honestly could probably be anything for anyone as long as it does that, and that would be a magical object for you, and everybody can have an object like that. I'm sure maybe probably many people do. Then there's a type of object that has magical properties in and of itself. And let's take the 16 stones of the Jaredites, for example. Is it really too hard to believe that a stone could be touched by the finger of God and be lit or could emit light for a year or so, maybe longer, but at least a year or so, and it could have that quote unquote magical property? I think that's fine. I don't see any problem with that kind of a magical object. So there are these two types of things: something that has a magical property, and by magic we mean something we just don't understand, the scientific process or the chemical process by which it's doing what it's doing, but it's doing it, and it clearly had that function. And then objects that help us connect. Would you agree with that kind of classification?
Yeah, I would. And we don't know what all the properties were of the stone that he molted. We don't know what was in it or how much phosphorus was in it. We don't know. We don't have any idea on these things. But I have no problem with magical objects being able to do certain things, as well as the magic of a spiritual, connection to us. As a kid, I used to read a lot as a kid, and I wanted to believe in magic and doing things. And I remember reading, it was either Tom Sawyer or Huck Finn, and how they carved an X on the heel of their shoe, to bring good luck. Well, it didn't take me but 24 hours before I had an X on the heel of my shoe, or the rabbit's foot that we would carry in our pocket when we were kids. We had the rabbit's foot with a little chain on it that we would get. And so, but it doesn't, magic, it's, perhaps magic is the wrong word, like you mentioned, but it's supernatural. It's something we don't quite understand. We don't understand because it's beyond our understanding. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And perhaps that's what a miracle is something beyond our understanding. And the magical properties can exist within certain things for certain people.
But you've studied religions, all types of religions all over the world. I imagine the idea of sacred objects, magical objects, supernatural objects, this is something that exists in probably most, if not all, religions worldwide. Is that correct?
Yeah, religions and cultures. It's for existence, the heifer beetle, or the scarab, they call it the scarab beetle in Egypt, was considered to be magic, or the eye of Horus that we see. But it represented things, or there was a representation, as well as in that representation, people sometimes considered them magical in that the representation would become real. The eye of Horus means perfection, or what they call the eye of Horus, because together it makes a whole, and it's just a word for perfection. It's called the Wadjet eye, but it means perfection. Or the scarab beetle. The scarab means to become, and the word become in the scarab with the beetle itself, it's sometimes called a dung beetle, means you change your form but retain your identity. And that's what they were hoping, and that's why they would be buried with the scarabs on their chests and things, because they felt that because of the representation, they felt that it extended into a reality, the representation. And so they're changing their form but retaining their identity. They're going to become resurrected but still be the same person. We believe the same thing. We had an identity before this earth life. We come down, we receive a name and a blessing, but we have the same spirit, but we've changed our form. When we die, we go to the spirit world, but we still have this. We're still the same person. We've changed our form, but we've retained our identity. In the resurrection, we will change our form but retain our identity. In exaltation, we will change our form but retain our identity. And that's what the little scarab beetle, that's what the scarab beetle means, the heifer beetle. It means becoming, changing your form but retaining your identity. Is it the scarab beetle that they had that had the power, or was it the belief that they had that the beetle represented? And so we have to look at those things too. But there's nothing wrong with things having a supernatural power within certain contexts, but you just have to be careful that you don't run wild with it. So,
and throughout religion, throughout the world, throughout culture, there are all types of magical objects that I do think kind of fall into one of those two categories we talked about. But there's nothing strange or weird about it. It's, I think, our modern day ideas that, it's all about science or something like that that make us want to make that seem weird. But that's only, I think, in the last 100 years that anybody would feel like that. Before that, that's all that this was magical objects, and it seems to be pretty throughout all history and culture.
Yeah, with the French Revolution, with the Age of Enlightenment, and then the French Revolution, then you have at the same time, Joseph Smith said that Satan sets up his kingdom at the very same time that the Lord sets up his. And Joseph Smith had two contemporaries that come in Europe in the response, I think, of the Lord's setting up the gospel and the church on earth. And those two contemporaries of Joseph Smith were Karl Marx and Charles Darwin. Those are the two contemporaries. And we see religion jumping to the back, falling to the back with the Age of Enlightenment, Karl Marx saying religion was just an opiate, Charles Darwin coming in and saying that, trying to explain how all creation came about, that there's no supernatural involvement. And then you have the French Revolution that was against the church and the authority of the church and the beliefs of the church. And so you have this whole thing going on in Europe at the same time that Joseph Smith is trying to restore the supernatural, restore the concept of God, restore the reality of the other world. While everything else that's going on, Satan is at the very same time Joseph is setting up the church based on the reality of another world. All of Europe and what we might call the great thinkers of Europe are trying to destroy the reality of the other world.
Well, Bruce, it's been a pleasure as always. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us today and learning about false traditions. Remember to subscribe so future episodes are easier to find. Thanks for watching.